Welcome to the committee's third hearing of the 118th Congress, focused on dismantling barriers and building economic resilience for older workers. In April of 2021, this committee held a hearing about older workers' economic security as millions felt the impact of the pandemic recession. 2 years later, today's hearing revisits a similar topic, examining the state of the aging workforce today and opportunities to support these Americans into the future. We know that older Americans are working longer than ever before. Recent data shows that only 45%, just 45% of 65-year-olds are currently retired, compared to 58% in 2000. Many seniors seek to remain in the workforce to make ends meet or to regain income lost while caregiving. In fact, roughly 1 in 3 older adults age 65 and older are economically insecure, with the average income being below 200% of the federal poverty level. And it is worse in communities of color. Over half of Black and Hispanic older adults over the age of 65 are economically insecure. I think I speak for every American when I say this is unacceptable. We must work to ensure that older adults are economically secure in retirement so that they can spend time with their families and friends after decades of hard work and contributions to our economy. But this economic security cannot be achieved without protections in the workplace. I have continued to push Congress to shore up these protections, including dismantling barriers like age discrimination. That's why I reintroduced my bipartisan Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, Senate Bill 1030, with Senators Grassley, Hassan, Collins, Baldwin, and Murkowski. This bipartisan bill, known by the acronym, as we have a lot of them around here, POATA, would restore crucial age discrimination protections and make it less burdensome for older workers to seek justice in court when they are the victims of discrimination in the workplace. But we know that beyond age discrimination, our workplaces need safeguards to protect workers. Unions can provide critical protections for their workers, even into retirement, something that I've heard time and again across Pennsylvania just in the last several weeks. In my hometown of Scranton, I heard from carpenters, union carpenters, about the benefits that their local union provided, ensuring that they can retire with strong pensions and good health care. In Plymouth Meeting, in the southeastern corner of our state, just this past Monday, I spoke to members of the Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local 1776, and they told me how the union connected them to resources to assist with critical issues like caregiving and financial literacy. And today I look forward to hearing from Dave McLymans, someone I've known a long time. I'll put that on the record. I've known him a while. Dave is a retired steelworker from Parksburg, Pennsylvania, in Chester County. He'll share his experience supporting other older workers' transition into retirement. So I believe Congress must continue fighting for workplace protections, fair wages, and retirement benefits to support older adults in the workplace and beyond. I want to thank Ranking Member Braun for again being with us today and helping us plan this hearing, and I'll turn to him now for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, and thank you all witnesses for being here. I ran a company for 37 years prior to becoming a U.S. Senator, and it was a real little one for so long, but as we grew, both regionally and then nationally, it's been the same from the beginning. It's not as big a deal when you're little because the critical mass isn't as great, but as you grow, workforce. It was the biggest thing I heard about pre-COVID. It's even more intense now. In our state of Indiana, 135,000 jobs are begging to be filled, that almost all of them pay more than your average four-year degree would. So we so often look to trying to replenish those jobs, fill them for folks coming out of high school. Sadly, they're misguided often, and we've got an untapped source that's right in front of us that don't need to probably learn the work ethic, that have got the skills already developed. Speaking of unions and steel, we're the biggest producer of that, and they've got apprenticeships. That's so important. Businesses are going to have to realize that they got to get involved not only with folks coming into the workforce, but realizing that there's a big untapped source already having those skills. You know, I think inflation has been a scourge to all of us. It's the other thing I hear, along with workforce, that we've got to get tamped down. Until we do, it's going to make ineffective, and it's going to be harder to do all the things we're talking about even here. You know, when it comes to 43% of older Americans are considering actually rejoining the workforce. That's an amazing number. I guess you can look at it two ways. Does that mean we're not doing a good enough job preparing to where you can retire and enjoy yourself? Maybe it's because some people, like me, will never fully retire. You're going to want to be doing something, and just because that's the standard operating procedure, that doesn't mean that's where we should go. So I think what we want to do here is find out what the best practices are, what we can do to make sure that we're not overlooking a source that sadly I think has gone untapped. You know, another thing I'm worried about is many elderly may want to do something that's got great flexibility. It takes me to being an independent contractor or participating in the gig economy. And I'm one that believes there's such an important place for unions, especially when you're going up against the disproportionate power of large corporations. You need it. But I don't want unions to be trying to get involved in stuff where you're an independent contractor, the gig economy, Main Street small business in general. There's not a harder way to earn a paycheck than owning your own business to pay for your livelihood, and then having all the other things that go along with being maybe a business of one. So I think that's a tricky balance there as well. So when it comes to what we're interested in, economic opportunities for the elderly, I think there's so much upside potential. I think we're finally talking about it, making it an issue out there. I led a bicameral letter with 46 of my colleagues urging the administration to scrap a rule recently that I think impacts that business of one. And that's a place that gives you more flexibility than any job for someone wanting to come back into the workforce. So it's a tricky balance between having the right regulatory environment, the opportunity for skills that you've learned over a lifetime. It's unbelievable now for those that want to actually get back into the workforce. And I'm glad to see that we're raising this to a profile that's going to discuss all aspects of the issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Braun. Now we'll turn to the introduction of our witnesses. These introductions will be brief. I apologize for that in advance, but we want to get to their testimony. Our first witness is Dr. Ernest Gonzalez, who's the James Weldon Johnson Professor of Social Work at New York University in New York City, which many of us know as NYU. He's also the director of NYU's Center for Health and Aging Innovation, where he focuses on productive aging and increasing wellness through intergenerational connection. So we thank him for being here. I'll turn next to Ranking Member Braun to introduce our second witness.
So, Dr. Laya Palagashvili, I had to take the phonics on that one, so is a senior research fellow at George Mason University's Mercatus Center. She researches public policy and labor economics. Her focus is the future of work, non-traditional work arrangements, and the independent workforce. Doctor was previously a professor of economics at State University of New York, purchase. She has been published in academic journals and media outlets, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Welcome.
And our third witness is Christine Van Landingham. Christine is the Chief Executive Officer at Region 4 Area Agency on Aging, we often call AAA, another acronym, in southwestern Michigan. The Region 4 AAA provides and facilitates a variety of in-home and community-based services, including adult daycare, meal delivery, senior center programs, and mature worker programs like the Senior Community Service Employment Program, another acronym, CSHEP, SCSEP. We're grateful for her being here and traveling. She told me she had to go through LaGuardia to get to Washington, so we'll work on that direct flight. Our fourth and final witness I made reference to in my opening, Dave McLymans, former steelworker from Chester County. Dave served in the United States Army in Vietnam, and I think all of us join together in thanking Dave for his service to our country. Dave then worked as a steelworker until his retirement in 2013, having served in various leadership roles in his local union throughout his tenure. Today, Dave represents District 10 of the United Steelworkers Organization for Active Retirees that goes by the acronym SOAR, S-O-A-R. Dave, thank you for being here today. So we'll start with our first witness, Dr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Senators Casey and Braun, for inviting me today to present in front of this very special Committee on Aging. I want to thank Senator Braun for representing my loving in-laws at the state of Indiana, and Senator Gillibrand, who I understand is at another hearing, another important one, from my adopted home state of New York. Senators, we are living longer than we have ever in the history of humankind. Prior to COVID, there was a study that predicted half of children that are born in Western society today will live to be 100 years of age. The other half are expected to push into their 80s and 90s. Even as we emerge from the pandemic, epidemiologists are quite confident that extended longevity will rebound, similar to what happened during the global pandemic in our last century. The question before all of us is not just how do we live a long life, but how do we live a long, healthy life with a strong economic foundation, with strong social bonds, with family, friends, and community, and in a diverse, loving, and peaceful society? It's an honor to share with you some of the research that answers aspects of that question. The concept of productive aging really puts forward the fundamental view that we have to build the capacity of older adults to be better utilized in activities that make economic contributions to society: work, volunteering, caregiving, and education. Older workers make up 35% of the U.S. population, yet they contribute approximately 40% of the national economic output. They're also tutors in schools, in libraries, and hospitals, all valued at $77 billion annually. And the benefits of productive activities are not just in dollars. Under optimal conditions, employment and civic engagement is associated with fewer depressive symptoms, lower risk of mortality and hypertension, improved cognitive functioning, and increased economic security. Yet, Senators, cultural norms and social structures limit older adults' full participation in these important productive roles. Ageism is expensive. It costs the U.S. $850 billion in GDP each year due to the untapped resources of producing goods and services by older workers. Age discrimination is complex, at times evident, other times subtle, constant for some, episodic for others. Yet research clearly demonstrates that older workers experience age discrimination in nearly every phase of employment: hiring, promotion, performance evaluation, workplace opportunity and climate, and age discrimination undermines health and is associated with early retirement and turnover. Legislation that requires targets to demonstrate age as a decisive factor in cases does not reflect the complexity of the phenomenon and is misaligned with age discrimination often co-occurring with other forms of bias. In sum, age discrimination is bad for people and it's bad for the economy. We must end ageism and other forms of bias, and it's possible. Interventions are needed across the macro to micro continuum. We need to pass proposed legislation specifically protecting older workers against Discrimination Act, PAWODA, which will send a clear cultural and institutional message that ageism in the workplace is not tolerated. Multi-generational workforces are naturally occurring given longevity. The challenge now is to maximize the strengths and the talents of each generation rather than pitting them against each other. Ending ageism will maximize the capacity to work longer, yield greater economic and health outcomes for individuals, families, and society, and passing PAWODA is an important first step. Shifting gears again a little bit, volunteering in later life, it's a hidden jewel. It is often a catalyst for retirees to return to work. Volunteering just a minimum of 200 hours per year leads to tremendous cognitive, physical, socio-emotional health. And moreover, when policies bring older and younger generations together, there are often win-win-win outcomes. And the good news is that younger and older generations want to work together on critical issues: education, mental health, the environment, and housing. Living a long, healthy, and meaningful life with a solid economic foundation and strong social bonds requires us to reimagine social policies within the context of living 100 years. Passing PAWODA is an important first step, and bringing generations together is the second. I welcome further conversations with you and Senate staff members, and thank you for having me here.
Dr. Gonzalez, thank you for your testimony and your presence here today. We'll now turn to Dr. Palashvili.
Good morning, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Braun, and members of the Senate Special Committee on Aging. It is an honor to testify before you. My name is Leah Palagashvili, and I'm an economist at the Marketa Center at George Mason University. My research focus is on the independent workforce and the evolving nature of work. Today, my testimony focuses on how independent work opportunities are increasingly valuable to older workers, especially at a time when the broader macroeconomic trends are troubling. My three key themes are: 1, the independent workforce provides flexible work arrangements for millions of older Americans. 2, with rising inflation and a gloomy economic outlook, older workers face a troubling future. And 3, policies that restrict independent work will disproportionately harm older workers. Non-traditional employment arrangements such as freelancing, contracting, gig work, or self-employment have long been a main source of income opportunities for retired or older workers who have moved past the 9-to-5 routine, but remain open to transitioning to part-time or short-term work. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there was a survey in 2017 and found that older workers were more likely to be independent contractors than any other age group. The share of 55 and older workers accounted for close to 40% of overall independent contractors. Independent work opportunities for older workers are found across a variety of different occupations and roles. So, for example, on-call workers ages 55 to 64 were most likely to be substitute teachers at elementary and secondary schools. A National Bureau of Economic Research study illustrated how the likelihood of individuals being independent workers and in self-employment increases significantly with age. As individuals approach retirement, they may have financial or personal reasons for continuing to work. However, the short-term, flexible, or reduced hour arrangements they need may be more difficult to find within the traditional employment jobs. For example, there was a recent economics research with a survey that found that many employers do not offer employees nearing retirement age the option to reduce their hours on their current jobs. Therefore, for many older workers, independent work is an attractive way to ease into retirement, to earn income when they are no longer part of the full-time employment workforce, especially if they already have health care coverage. The Federal Reserve announced last week that a recession is expected in the coming months. At the same time, we are still seeing high prices for basic goods and necessities. This is worrisome for older workers whose employment prospects are generally poor, and many older Americans live on fixed incomes or limited savings. In fact, several news outlets have profiled stories of older and retired workers who are expecting to return to work at age 75 to cover the increased costs of food, rent, medicine, and utilities. This makes it vital to support independent work opportunities. However, there are federal policies and regulations that seek to restrict this independent work and self-employment opportunities, such as the Department of Labor's recently proposed new regulations on independent contractors. The DOL is proposing these regulations to restrict independent work with hopes that organizations will hire these workers as employees instead. Now, at first glance, this may seem like a win for workers who are reclassified as employees. However, because older workers voluntarily leave employment to pursue independent work opportunities, having fewer of them available is not a win-win situation. It is also, of course, impossible for every single independent work opportunity to turn into a full-time offer, employment offer, thereby leading to job losses. The rule does go far in impacting legitimate independent workers who are properly classified. It's also worth noting that the DOL's almost 200-page rule creates more complexity and confusion in determining whether a worker is indeed properly classified as an independent worker. That means even if a worker is properly classified, the new rule would still deter organizations, especially small businesses who don't have extensive legal counsel, from working with contractors and independent workers altogether. And this is actually, in fact, precisely what happened with AB 5, which is a similar rule in California that restricted independent work. It was actually small businesses like music venues, theaters, and operas that stopped working with independent workers because they were afraid of even a potential misclassification issue, when the reality was that many of these workers were already properly classified. Eliminating independent worker opportunities will mean that older workers will have fewer opportunities to earn income, further increasing financial stress in their households. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Doctor, thanks very much. I saw the way you wrapped up there as the light was turning red. That's impressive. It doesn't always happen here. But
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your testimony. Ms. Van Lanningham, thank you very much.
I'll try to match that cadence. Thank you, and good morning, Senators Casey and Braun. Region 4 Area Agency on Aging is one of 16 area agencies on aging in Michigan and one of 614 in the nation, all designated under the Older Americans Act to develop, coordinate, and deliver a wide range of home and community-based services to support older adults and their caregivers with the goal of enabling them to live and age well in their homes and communities. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Participating in the labor market, even at an older age, has positive impacts on social connectedness, self-rated health, and is a critical component of financial well-being. But older Americans face significant barriers to job entry or re-entry. The barriers we most often see include inadequate technology skills and insufficient broadband access, a lack of a professional network to help find job opportunities, caregiving duties, and pervasive age discrimination. To address these challenges, our agency supports low-income older adults through employment barrier identification, technology education, on-the-job training, caregiver supports, and a campaign to tackle ageism head-on. The Senior Community Service Program, or CSEP, authorized by the Title V of the Older Americans Act, is central to our jobs training program. CSEP provides on-the-job training for unemployed job seekers who are age 55 and older and have a family income of no more than 125% of the federal poverty level. Staff work with older job seekers to identify career goals and overcome barriers. Older job seekers are matched with nonprofit organization host sites in our community where participants work in on-the-job training opportunities for which they are paid minimum wage for their service. They receive interview coaching, resume writing, and individualized help securing unsubsidized employment that is permanent. Funding for the CSEP program is severely limited. Region 4 AAA is funded for only 13 positions, in a region that serves over 76,000 older adults. Our AAA offers additional job training services through our Campus for Creative Aging, where we cast a vision of older years being a time of creativity, purpose, growth, and learning. We have a state-of-the-art computer learning center where volunteers teach classes for older learners in age-friendly technology training, and teachers that range in age from 17 to 80 plus. Older adults and younger individuals benefit from this shared learning experience. It breaks down barriers and reduces stereotypes when cross generations share an experience. Ageism, including a general assumption that older job seekers are not able to learn new skills, is among the most often cited reason older job seekers say they're not able to secure employment. People like Margaret Lowe from Benton Harbor. She left the job market when she needed to care for her mother. With a background in social work, Margaret had maintained full-time employment even while caring for her son, who is a special needs child. The additional caregiving responsibilities for her mother made full-time employment impossible. Margaret cared for her mother for 15 years. She lives on Social Security income that is less than $17,000 a year, which means that Margaret can no longer meet her living expenses and needs to re-enter the job market. She applied for numerous positions, and with a college education and good work history, she assumed she'd be able to find a job. Given the workforce challenges right now, she was not correct. She struggled to even get one interview. When asked why, Margaret said, "It's my age. It has to be. I have a college education, a good work history, but they see the years on my resume, know approximately how old I am, and think I can't do the job." She's currently serving as a CSEP participant in a call center in our community. She's updating her computer skills and executing a plan to secure unsubsidized employment. When asked what she would like this committee to know, Margaret replied, "Give older workers a chance. We're more stable, we show up on time. With maturity comes the ability to adjust and be adaptable, and we can learn. There's no reason I can't do this job if given a chance." Congress can better support programs in assisting older workers by appropriating adequate funding for Older Americans Act Title V CSEP programming, funding senior technology programs at the community level, and increasing access and combating ageism and age discrimination at every level. Another high barrier is caregiving responsibilities. Like Margaret, 1 in 5 adults in the United States faces the challenges of caring for aging parents or other relatives. Shifting ahead to save time. With adequate funding for the Title III caregiver supportive services, fewer Americans providing care for aging or disabled loved ones will need to reduce or leave their employment, and employers will save money in terms of workforce turnover. These challenges must be faced head-on if we, as a nation, want to encourage economic self-sufficiency, to promote staying engaged as we age, and to offer all workers equal opportunity to contribute. It's not just the right thing to do for older workers, it's the financially prudent one to do. Supporting older workers helps us all. In reducing barriers and investing in older workers, our society and our economy can tap the significant amount of social capital that is older workers' knowledge, experience, while gaining a stronger, more diverse workforce that stands ready to help address today's workforce challenges. Doubling funding for the Senior Community Service Program so that more low-income workers and potential workers can get the training they need. Doubling funding for the National Family Caregiver Support Program, Title IIIE, so more family caregivers can stay engaged in the workforce. And ensuring that broadband access efforts are also paired with technology training for older adults. To be successful, this training has to be delivered at the community level. We use volunteers, but more financial resources are needed to deliver this work. Thank you for your attention to the barriers and challenges that older workers face and your willingness to undertake solutions. The National Network of Area Agencies on Aging is ready to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Van Lanningham, and we're grateful for your testimony. We'll conclude with Dave McLymans.
Chairman Casey and Ranking Member Braun, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Dave McLymans. I'm a Vietnam veteran and a 54-year member of the United Steelworkers. I first held my union card after my tour of duty in the U.S. Army ended in 1969, becoming a steelworker member at Bud Company's trailer division. I became a shop steward in 1972 and eventually financial secretary, and then I became president of the union. That plant closed in 1987, and the company tried to walk away from us. It was the sad state of affairs, former employees, management, and union personnel hanging by a thread. But we had rights, and we had the union. We fought for what we were owed and what we had a right to, as outlined in our union contract. We recouped 5 weeks back pay for our brothers and sisters, and we fought successfully to recover the pension and benefits that were promised on paper. The pension still pays retirees like myself to this day because of our union and our work. I still had many years ahead of me, and in 1988, I began my career again at Lucan Steel Company in Coatesville. 5 company name changes later, the steel mill is now owned by Cleveland-Cliffs, and I will say that Lucan Steel Company is the oldest continuously operating steel mill in the country. It was formed in 1810 by the first female industrialist, which was Rebecca Lucas. And anyway, still operating today. I retired from working in the melt shop in 2013 when I was 67. Some people wonder why I didn't retire earlier, but I enjoyed the physical activity, and since I'm an Agent Orange diabetic, it was good for me to keep moving around. The good thing about the union is that we negotiate with the company on ways to support workers throughout their working careers and ensure a safe working environment. The union helps set the terms so that we can focus on doing our job and doing it right. When I retired, my participation in the union did not end. Coatesville has one of the first chapters of the Steelworkers Organization of Active Retirees, SOAR. Formed in 1985, SOAR is an integral part to our union's mission. SOAR helps educate retirees on their pensions and retiree health care options available through our contracts. SOAR has also educates members on federal policies which impact retirees' pocketbooks, like changes in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. For example, the federal government and states together spent $116 billion in Medicaid home and community-based services in 2020, serving millions of elderly adults and people with disabilities. This is why SOAR and the USW educates on the debt ceiling and the need for no cuts in 2 programs which aid retirees like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I didn't serve my country, work, and pay taxes for 44 years as an active steelworker, just to let my voice fade away and see younger generations lose benefits I fought for, and my fathers and my father and grandparents fought for all our lives. We also supported the American Rescue Plan and the Special Financial Assistance Program for Multi-Employer Pensions, also known as the Butch-Lewis Act. Over 1 million retirees faced dramatic cuts to their benefits and through no fault of their own. The Butch-Lewis program was a small amount of aid during the COVID pandemic with huge benefits. Congress approved close to $4 trillion in loans and loan guarantees to businesses and individuals, which is a helpful comparison when reflecting on the estimated $94 billion cost to preserve a pension system benefiting 10 million participants. It would also cost the government more if we let those plans collapse. Our SOAR chapter has regular meetings in which we go over the issues of the day and schedule speakers for each meeting. For example, we just had Bill Pierce of the executive director of the Brandywine Valley Active Aging Agency, who explained all the services available in the region. We are a part of the community, a place to gather and learn. Finally, our SOAR chapter is a source of institutional knowledge. I can't tell you the number of times I've helped former members with ways to access their pension and their benefits, or a place to go for help. And you'd be surprised, a lot of guys think they've lost their pension, but the problem is they just haven't changed their address, so you can make contact to them, you know? I encourage the committee to uplift older workers and union retiree organizations like SOAR in their work. We urge senators to support community groups like ours. And finally, as you look to the future, I urge you not to cut or change benefits to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We are the richest democracy in the world, and you know we can afford to allow workers to retire in dignity. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to answering questions that you may have.
Dave,
Thank
thanks
you.
for your testimony, and all of our witnesses will go to questions. But before I do that, I want to make note of the schedule around here. It's Thursday. A lot of senators are in and out of the hearing, have other hearings to go to, some juggling 2 hearings, 3 hearings. I know Senator Braun and I are juggling at least 2, including this one, but some juggling more than that. We're joined by Senator Ricketts, who's here, a new member of the Senate, a new member of the committee. Obviously, we're grateful he's here. And as others are here and are ready for questions, Senator Vance just arrived as well. We appreciate him being here. But Dave, I'll start with you. I'll just take you back to those moments when you're coming up on retirement, as you said, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
So you served your country in Vietnam, then you're with the steelworkers all those decades, then you're ready to retire. I guess I want to ask you a two-part question that's related. One is to ask you, what were the challenges you faced then in understanding what you needed to learn or know about your own retirement as a steelworker? And then 2, how did that experience then and then since that time help you work with others when they're facing a similar set of questions? They're retiring, because I think a lot of Americans, whether they're in a union or not, when they come to retirement, they got a lot of complex questions they're trying to navigate through. So tell us about what you were thinking at the time and then how that's helped you work with others.
There we go. Okay. Moving up to retirement, I hadn't planned on retiring when I did, but we were going to spring training. So I went down, you know, I said, well, this is at the end of February, we're going, but because I was going to wait till the hot weather got there, because a melt shop is hot, dirty, nasty. It's got every kind of element you would want. But I figured I'd wait until July, but didn't happen. But anyway, the work up to retirement is, you know, you're going to not going to lose your friends, but you're going to miss the guys you work with. And I loved the work. It didn't bother me. I know it was hot, dangerous, and all that good stuff that comes with making steel, but I enjoyed the physical activity. Physical activity was good for me, being a diabetic, and why not? Yeah, you just keep going. So after retirement, I just continued on with my union activities, and I would go down to Union Hall maybe 3-4 times a week, see what needed to be done. And if there was people I used to work with, say at Bud Company, they didn't know what happened to their pension, and I tell them, hey, here's what you have to. I keep it in my wallet. You know, let me write this on a card. You can call these people. You will get your pension. It's there. It's not a lot, not like a steel mill pension, but you need to get it. Every dime counts when you retire. Believe me, every dime counts, every penny. And Yeah, it's a great deal, and I'm happy to keep on being involved.
And so you still get a lot of those kind of basic questions from
All the
folks.
time.
Yeah.
All the time. I get phone calls. How do you make this heat in the mill? And, you just do what you do. Not that I'm a professor of meteorology, but I did the job for a lot of years, and it's not hard. You just do what you have to do.
Well, we appreciate what SOAR does to keep those steel workers informed about what's available to them, and having those, as you said, having those speakers come in and provide that kind of background and education. I'll move to Dr. Gonzalez about the question you've made reference to, and so several of our witnesses have age discrimination. I mentioned the bill that we have, a bipartisan bill. Pretty simple bill. What we're trying to do is to restore the level of proof that was there before a Supreme Court decision that was decided way back in 2009. So you've had all these years with this different standard that a worker has to prove in order to be successful in that case. And I'm grateful that we have bipartisan support for a bill that will restore that standard that was there for so many years under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. But Dr. Gonzalez, based upon your research, and I know you've spent a lot of time in this, how would this particular bill, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, help protect older workers from workplace discrimination?
Thank you for the question. Discrimination within the workplace is really quite complex, and through quantitative representative samples that I have really drawn most of my conclusions from, it varies, all depending on sociodemographic characteristics. We had a testimony here talking about Margaret, and she was so crystal clear that it was age discrimination. Quantitatively and qualitative research, some can't say that is that's the reason why. More often than not, respondents say, well, it could be a confluence of issues. It could be because of ageism and sexism. It could be it's very, very difficult. Interestingly, in the samples of older adults in the health and retirement study, it's representative. I looked at workplace discrimination and everyday discrimination. In workplace discrimination, it was older whites that reported the highest level of discrimination. In 2016, it was about 82%. One of my PhD students recently told me that they looked at the 2020 data and it had significantly increased since then. From workplace discrimination, it's after whites report the highest rates, it's blacks and Hispanics. Everyday discrimination, similar findings. The difference between everyday discrimination and workplace discrimination, at least from a research perspective, it's everyday that follows up, why do you think you are discriminated against? Half of that sample can't answer why. They can't attribute it to one reason or another. The other half, when we stratify by race and ethnicity, ageism is the first reason for whites and Hispanics. It's the second reason for blacks. Racism is the first reason for blacks. And so all of that complexity happens in real time, over time. It's subtle, sometimes quite evident. It's very difficult to say that age is the decisive factor. And so really going back to Congress's intentions back in the 1970s that age could be a factor really protects individuals and really gives them a winning chance to really win in court. Right now, during the pandemic, I was working with the National Academies of Sciences on a consensus report. And in that report, we came to the conclusion that under law currently, it's older white men that disproportionately win age discrimination cases compared to their counterparts. And I think that resonates with the quantitative data that I've just presented to. So really, going back to Congress's original intent would bolster the capacity for individuals to be protected from age discrimination when cases and when they come before the court. And it would also send a clear cultural message. Sorry, I know you want to ask a question. They'll send us a clear cultural message that it's not acceptable.
Doctor, thanks very much. I'll turn to Ranking Member Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go after Senator Vance. I think you got a conflict. Yep.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Braun. You know, I wanted to direct my questions to Dr. Palagashvili. All right, good. Good. Glad I didn't screw that one up. I like to challenge myself here in these committee hearings. You know, what are the things, just thinking about age discrimination and some of our older Americans in the workforce? You know, this is an issue I know very personally. I was raised by my grandparents, and you know, one of the things that occurs to me is that we have a lot of older Americans who are in the workforce, who are providing very valuable services. They're just not getting paid for it, right? And I believe the number is about 2 million American children are currently being raised full-time by their grandparents. That doesn't count, of course, the many millions of Americans on top of that who are in some sort of kinship arrangement. And I guess the first question I have, Doctor, is just, there are a lot of ways in which we subsidize different child care arrangements at the federal government level. We subsidize daycare, we subsidize other child care arrangements, and I have no criticism or problem with any of those arrangements, but it does occur to me that when we subsidize some arrangements, but we don't subsidize the arrangements that fall hardest on some of our grandparents and also the children who are raised by grandparents, that maybe can cause some problems. And I'm just curious what your views are on that, about whether we should maybe be a little bit less biased in how we think about childcare from a federal social policy perspective. It seems like we have a particular bias right now, and unfortunately that bias falls against some of our elderly folks.
Senator Vance, that's a really great question and a very important topic. It's slightly outside of my expertise in that I don't focus on that, but I will tell you that when my research focus is on the independent workforce, and what we do see there is that a lot of caregivers go into independent work precisely because it provides them the flexibility that they need to take care of their family members and still make income at the same time. And so I'm happy to speak to that a bit more if you're interested, but that's that is something that is an important source of income. We look at surveys of moms, working moms who are primary caregivers who voluntarily left employment, and they talk specifically about leaving employment because they needed to take on more flexible work arrangements to be able to also care for their families. And so these different non-traditional employment arrangements actually provide valuable work opportunities for moms.
Yeah, maybe just to pick up on that thread a little bit, you know, you've obviously studied the independent work arrangements a fair amount, and I guess if you can walk me through, what is really driving, let's take obviously focusing on elderly Americans, what's driving a lot of those folks who want to reenter the workforce? You mentioned flexibility. Obviously, there's income, right? People need money to get by, and unfortunately, we live in a high inflation environment where a lot of people are finding that their fixed income, their Social Security check just isn't going as far. What's really sort of driving this? Is it a sense of fulfillment, a desire to sort of do something, in a post-retirement world? Is it purely income-driven? Is it flexibility-driven? I'd like to understand sort of what's driving people.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Fantastic question. And it's actually both things that you mentioned. So the research suggests that older workers continue to work for a combination of financial necessity and preference for work. And actually, we see more older workers right now doing it for financial reasons rather than preferences because of the troubling state of our economy and high prices. And I will note on the flexibility aspect as well, there was a recent study that was published in a high-ranking economics journal that actually found that about 60% of non-working older Americans would be willing to return to work if there were flexible work arrangements and reduced hour arrangements available to them.
Great. Thank you, Doctor, and thanks for everybody else for being here. Sorry we didn't get time to ask to answer questions. Dr. Gonzalez, sorry, let me, because I know I'm running low on time here and I want to be respectful, but let me just close by saying that I think it's worth us thinking about this as a lot of grandparents are being driven back into the workforce, some for their own reasons, some for purely external financial hardship reasons. That's going to affect a lot of our young kids and a lot of the grandparents who are taking care of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vance. We'll turn next to Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Vance basically asked the question I was most interested in, that relative difference between, what is motivating folks when you most likely want to be enjoying life, to come back into the workforce. And I think you made it fairly clear, and they want flexibility when they do get in there. This could be, pulled this out of my opening statement and to put a little meat on the bone on why half of older Americans have spent their emergency fund. That's the number one thing that any financial advisor will say, have that set aside. Half of them have gone through it. Quarter have depleted whatever retirement income they had in terms of gone through that as well. Sometimes drawing it down much quicker if it's above and beyond what you get through Social Security. Never imagine doing it. And then I think the other thing that is coming along, and I've weighed in against it, you've got policies. Like currently, there's a policy out there that enables fiduciaries to actually push different investments that may not highlight the best return on investment. And that's called the ESG rule. And I'm the Republican that started the climate caucus here. Took a lot of heat for it. I think it's important. But how much of that, to where you're depleting your savings, you're now maybe marginalizing your return. The only study said that would lower your return by 30%. Is that scaring people back into the workforce? And if we had less of that, would we have less of a need to bring older people back into the workforce? Ms. Van Landingham, would you comment on that? And then Doctor, you as well.
Certainly. Thank you for the question. We absolutely do see older adults returning to the workforce out of a sense of need. It is at times because they've depleted their savings, as you say. Their out-of-pocket medical costs have depleted them, and perhaps changes in their retirement plans and bad investment advice. I will say that predominantly it is individuals who are in economic need, and then second behind that is those that find retirement sitting on playing golf all the time or sitting around waiting for the next thing to happen is not what it's all cracked up to be. They want purpose and they want meaning. And as Dave talked about, the physical benefits that he gets from being engaged and staying active and having purpose, that's where a lot of the benefit happens. So yes, the retirement income doesn't go as far as they anticipated. Medical costs, out-of-pocket medical costs, are eating up those savings, but it's a lot about purpose-driven and wanting to be valued and be able to have a contribution to our economy and to society.
Dr. Palagashvili, briefly on it, because I got another question.
I would agree with my lovely neighbor over here that we do see older workers, according to the economics research, going for financial reasons, and of course, the other aspect of that is personal reasons. So I won't have much more to add to that. Thank you.
Dr. Gonzalez, you mentioned the therapeutic benefit, and Dave weighed in on that as well. And I can see where that makes a difference. The thing I hear most often when elderly do get to a job, it's a world of technology currently. And I know my own skills. I've had to really get refinement over time to fully embrace it. And in my company, we leverage technology as a differentiator in a logistics and distribution business. How much of a impediment is the lack of maybe the comfortability and the skill set with basic technology hurting elderly when they want to come back into the workforce?
I think we could all agree that we all have tech issues, right? We all have tech, whether it's with our TV or a computer or our phone, we run into them. And even when we attend conferences by Apple, they have tech issues. So it's not necessarily an older adult issue per se. It is, and I'm so thrilled that my other neighbor over there is doing incredible work around technology. Cognitive health for quite some time. Neurologists thought that once your brain was fully developed at the age of 25, that's it. That is so bogus now. We know that cognitive plasticity occurs throughout the entire lifespan. And so we need to build programs that are sensitive to where that individual is at, what experience they've had, and meet them where they're at. And I believe that's what CSEP does in Michigan. They also do it in New York and New Mexico, Texas, other places. It's a really terrific program. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and you did it just right, because it just went into the red zone. So, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Braun. We'll turn next to Senator Ricketts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our panelists here for testifying here today. Right now, the HELP Committee is considering the nomination of Julie Su to lead the U.S. Department of Labor. And like many of my colleagues, we are concerned about some of the policies, the misguided policies she'd implement that would crush the independent contractor gig economy as we know it. And we've talked about that a little bit. Many workers that are past or near traditional retirement age, for a variety of reasons, whether it's financial need or the purpose they're seeking, are looking to work in the gig economy to give them more freedom and flexibility and find that fulfillment that we were talking about. Nebraska has an aging population. According to the last census, 16.4% of Nebraska's population is over the age of 65. Independent work makes up a main source of income opportunity for retired and older workers who want to transition into part-time work, and these workers include both independent contractors and gig workers. A Bureau of Labor Statistics survey found that 1 out of every 3 independent contractors were 55 or older, while less than a quarter of workers in traditional employment were 55 or older. People 55 or older make up 11% of the gig economy. So, Dr. Palagashvili, your testimony, or you talked about the independent contractor rule, and I think you talked about the Biden administration and how it fails to consider older workers participating in the gig economy or utilizing part-time work as independent contractors. If the administration rule is finalized, what do you expect to be the long-term ramifications to the gig workers and older workers and people who want to be independent contractors?
Thank you for your question, Senator. That's a very important question. What we expect is that there will be fewer independent work opportunities for all Americans, but this will disproportionately harm older Americans because they tend to be in independent work opportunities, precisely for the reasons that we talked about earlier, where they might not want full-time employment, are ready to transition out of the full-time 9-to-5 employment workforce, and so they seek these independent work opportunities specifically for those reasons. And I also cited a recent economics survey that found that 60% of non-working older Americans would be willing to work if there were flexible work arrangements, and that's precisely what these independent work opportunities provide for them. Because independent work opportunities are a vital source of income for older Americans who cannot take on traditional employment, eliminating those independent work opportunities will disproportionately harm older workers. And I would like to add that this is also at a time when inflation is high and traditional employment opportunities are likely to be scarcer. So it's unwise for the Department of Labor to also limit independent work opportunities, especially for older workers.
So talk a little bit about what is the aspects of the policies that you're most concerned about with regard to what the policy is. What are some of the things that they're going to be doing that's going to limit this?
So the regulation puts a very strict definition of what it means to be an independent worker. Now, it doesn't mimic the ABC test of the California's AB5, which was very problematic, as we all saw in the aftermath. But in the way that it downplays certain factors of the economic realities test and plays up other factors, it can functionally act like the ABC test from California's AB5. And that is really problematic because it will mean that legitimate independent workers, self-employed individuals, and freelancers would have to be reclassified as employees. And we all know that not every independent work opportunity turns automatically into employment opportunities. And especially for older Americans who don't want the employment opportunity, this is eliminating an income source for them. And as we saw in the aftermath of California's AB5, and this was reported by news outlets like the New York Times and the LA Times, there were significant job losses across the entire state and especially harmed older workers.
Outside the Biden administration's proposed independent contract rule, what regulations or red tape can we cut at the federal level to provide more flexibility and freedom to our older Americans who continue to want to contribute to our workforce?
I do think that the independent regulations around independent work is the most important, but there are also things that private employers could take as well by just allowing more flexible work arrangements and of these various opportunities to help older workers re-enter the workforce and take on these job opportunities.
Is there anything specifically, though, that the federal government could do? I mean, is there red tape at the federal level besides the independent contract rule the Biden administration is proposing that we should say, hey, here's another thing you should target when you're thinking about this. If you did this, it would really help our
Well, so one problem, it is back to the independent contractor, but it's not necessarily the Department of Labor, is that various different agencies across, so the various different agencies all have different rules for what it means to be an independent contractor, and that creates a lot of confusion. And so one worker might be an independent contractor under one rule, but under one agency, but not under another agency. So I think it's important, and that's a great red tape, to kind of have harmonization across agencies, perhaps adopting something like the IRS common law test across all agencies.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Senator Ricketts. And I'll come back for some questions now that I have. As I said, we're transitioning to other hearings today, so we may have to wrap up pretty soon. But I wanted to go back to a question that Ms. Van Landingham, you mentioned in your testimony about broadband, high-speed internet. That access is becoming even more critical to the 21st century workplace. We've all talked about it for years as a problem, or I should say the problem being lack of access to high-speed internet. So many examples in my home state of Pennsylvania. It was probably best encapsulated by a county commissioner who said to me on a phone call one day, kind of one of those conference calls, he was almost screaming into the phone, "Senator, kids can't do their homework," which kind of crystallized it for me. But obviously we know the impact on small business, everything from running a small business in a small town or a city, or trying to operate a farm without high-speed internet. We just can't do it. It's the equivalent of electricity years ago, how people couldn't function without it. So everyone knows the problem. We have several federal programs that invest dollars, but nothing on the scale that we're going to be able to invest through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We also have some investments in my home state, and I know a lot of other states will be following, investments from the American Rescue Plan legislation just for broadband, just for high-speed internet, but the infrastructure dollars will be much greater, even though Pennsylvania has already received $200 million, or will be receiving $200 million from the American Rescue Plan for high-speed internet. So we know the scale of the problem. We know even the beginnings of significant investment to make a difference. But as someone who represents a state that has 67 counties, but 48 are rural, I have a pretty good sense of some of the challenges that lack of high-speed internet presents to communities in our rural counties. Tell me a little more about, based upon your experience in Michigan, what you're seeing, especially through the lens of or in the context of rural areas. How does that kind of better access to high-speed internet help support older workers and to keep them connected in a very competitive workplace and economy?
Thank you for that. And I will echo that county commissioner and say, Senator, older adults cannot compete in today's workforce without broadband access and technology training. What we see in Michigan, we have very rural communities as well, and our PSA, our planning and service area, is 3 counties. One county, Berrien County, has a advanced strategic plan to really assess and understand and have a broadband access plan. Our other 2 more rural counties have none. And in fact, when I try to work remotely over the pandemic, I can't have video capabilities. I can't work in my own township, nor can anyone else, any other older adult living in my communities. So without broadband access, in fact, 42% of older Americans lack broadband access. That's 22 million older adults. And those in rural communities are 1.6 times more likely not to have that access. They can't do job searches. They can't participate in this many opportunities in a gig economy or in remote access, remote workforce opportunities. They can't benefit from the health, education, and nutrition support that's available online. Many of the things that we offer at our center are also offered remotely so that people can have access to that, but not if the broadband doesn't come to them. Also, they lack opportunities for caregiver support, for caregiver training, and telehealth and remote patient monitoring opportunities don't exist when you don't have broadband access. So as my colleague indicated, this broadband access impacts the entire population from school children to older adults, and those 2 extremes are disproportionately impacted.
Thanks very much. And I have lots more questions, but not enough time. And we're probably going to have to wrap up unless, Senator Braun?
I'm ready for a closing statement whenever you are.
Senator, thanks so much. I'll be brief in my closing, but I wanted to get, I'll read a statement for the record just so we have it. We have both, throughout the course of this hearing, heard a lot about expanding opportunities, but also knocking down or dismantling barriers for older workers that can result in a higher quality of life and increased ability to save for retirement. We heard from, earlier in the testimony, the Senior Community Service Employment Programs, so-called CSHEPs, that have set a foundation for older workers looking to stay engaged, learning new skills, and giving back to their community. Other supports provided through the area agencies on aging and retirement advocacy groups like SOAR can go a long way to ensuring that seniors are set up to thrive in their later years. Dave McLymans, with his work with the steelworkers, shared his experience as a retired steelworker and a proud union steelworker member, as well as his current work to protect older workers and their rights as a SOAR board member. We know that it's important that we better understand the state of the aging labor force and the challenges they face. That's why several members of the Senate have, and members of this committee are sending a letter to the GAO to request a study on this issue. Their findings will help us better serve older workers in the future, and it's important that we continue to support older workers seeking justice for unjust terminations due to discrimination. I have the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act that will bolster protections for older workers and provide a level playing field for them. I'll continue to work with our colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle to advance that bill to make sure that we're protecting those workers and setting them up for long-term success. I'll turn to Ranking Member Braun if he has any closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great conversation. I come from Main Street America, where most of my emphasis has been with small business. And you can see that so much of the reentry generally into something later in life is with the smallest business, maybe a gig economy job, or I look at my wife and many people in our downtown Jasper, Indiana, where they're working into their late 60s and 70s and enjoy it, and then maybe have the next generation lined up to do it. So we got to be careful that I've always felt there's been a distinction, and we hadn't discussed it really formally before, between whatever we do here that might be aimed at larger entities versus Main Street and small business. It's a significant difference in terms of how you have the tools to navigate through it. And when you think about it, almost everything we've talked about today would be most likely re-entering not into a Fortune 500 company. I think they're wanting to scoot you out the door maybe earlier than many would like to leave it. So I think it's important, whatever we do in terms of legislation, that we don't make it more difficult for the reasons of economic necessity, and even better, that you don't want to jump into the rocking chair and you want to keep working as long as you can. And our policies are conducive to it. And to me, so often, government ends up doing stuff that doesn't aim in the right direction, and it ends up making it worse than better. And my hope is that as we discuss this, we make it as easy as can be without the heavy hand of maybe government for the elderly when they're willing and able to get back in and do what they want, not overburdened by government interference and regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I wanted to mention as well, which I should have mentioned earlier, there's several senators who have appeared at the hearing, either in person or in the case of Senator Blumenthal, virtually because of his recent injury. But Senator Blumenthal, Senator Warnock, and Senator Rick Scott all were here today at various times and not able to ask questions. I do want to thank again our witnesses, and we appreciate your time and traveling to get here, and we wish we had more time today. But you brought your experience and your expertise and your insights to this committee, and we're grateful for that. If any senators have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, the hearing record will be kept open for 7 days until next Thursday, April 27th. Thank you all for participating today. This concludes our hearing. Thanks.
Thank you.